Alrighty, so now let's go ahead and move on to wrapping up our service layer, at least as much as we can here. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to open up my services package, and I'm going to make a couple changes to a handful of these files, and they're going to be pretty minor changes. So let's start off with our contact request. Now, for the contact request, I put in an ID here, but I actually don't mean to have an ID for our contact request. I consider the fact that it sends us the ID of the other user to be enough of an ID. In fact, the way I modeled the actual database itself, there is no primary key, or there is a primary key, obviously, on this table, but the primary key is the user IDs themselves. It isn't any sort of special ID. So basically what I'm saying is, let's just go ahead and nuke it. So all I did was I went and I just nuked ID from everything. Now there will be errors in our code now. Now if I tried to do a compile, there would be errors because I removed that field. But we'll go ahead and address where this constructor is used elsewhere as we move along. So I won't worry about the fact we can't compile right now. Now let's jump into our message object. Now for our message class. Now for our message class, what I want to do here is I want to make one of our fields mutable, one of our properties mutable, because you see most of it is immutable, and that's typically how I write my DTOs. But there is one in particular field that I want to be mutable, and that is our isRed. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say public void set isRed boolean isRed. And it'll simply say this.isRed equals isRed. Pretty much just adding a setter to the isRed property, not a whole lot to it. So next up, let's move on to our account. So for our account, there's a couple things I need to do here. First of all, I'm going to come down here to, where are you? Or I can just control F, I guess. My avatar, my change avatar response. Now for my change avatar response, I want to put in a new avatar URL here. So I want to say public string avatar URL. And this is going to be something that's going to be returned to us. Oh, come on. Oh, right. We're not in C# anymore, are we? String is capitalized. Okay, so the avatar URL is going to be returned by the server, and it's just going to be the URL of wherever the avatar is uploaded to. Now, the actual URL of the avatar is determined entirely by the server arbitrarily. Well, there is a specific algorithm in the case of what I wrote, but I mean arbitrarily as in it's kind of the avatar URL is kind of a black box as far as the client is concerned, and we need to be able to retrieve what the server ended up setting the avatar URL to. Next up, I kind of want to do the same thing with my update profile response. So I'm going to put in a public string display name and a public string email for the return values for our update profile response. So those will be set back from the server, just in case the server might have done some modification of the display name or email for whatever purposes. Basically, I'm just saying the server gets the final say in how the display name and the email are set, and then it'll tell the client what they eventually got set to, even if it was exactly what the user sent in to begin with. Now I want to come down here and I want to make a request response here that's going to look a little weird because we're not going to actually be using this request response pair until we move on to the live server code base stuff. And it's going to be a public static class update GCM registration request, and it's going to have a public string registration ID. And I'm going to generate a constructor here. And then, of course, we're going to have a public static class update GCM registration response extends service request or service response. So I do really quickly before I tell you guys what this is, want to emphasize that the spelling and capitalization is significant for all of these parameters, both from the request and the response classes, because these I'm going to have be automatically serialized and deserialized by GSON, Google's JSON parser. And as a result, the casing and the spelling is absolutely significant, so make sure all that stuff is properly spelled. Anyway, GCM is basically Google's push notification API. And so to have the push notification API work, the device itself has to register with the Google Play services and then tell my server what the registration ID is so that my server can send the phone push notifications. And this is what this API endpoint is for. It's not something that's going to be used for the in-memory code, but it is something that's going to be used once we hook everything up. Alrighty, so the last thing I want to do here is inside my messages, I do want to go ahead and fix a quick bug. And that is our search message is request. This class allows us to search for a particular contact and include sent and or received messages. But you'll notice that we have two constructors, one that takes in a from contact ID and one that doesn't. What I want to do is, for the second constructor, the one that doesn't, I want to initialize the from contact ID to -1 so the server knows that this particular search query doesn't include a from contact ID. So I'm going to say from contact ID equals -1 in the constructor. Otherwise, the server would be looking for a contact with the ID of 0 and most likely not find one. Anyway, so that's that. Now down here at the bottom, I'm going to do a couple interesting things. First of all, just like what we did before with the avatar and display name and all that fun stuff, I'm going to have the server send back a copy of the message that was actually sent. So I'm going to say public message, and I'm adding this to my send message response class. So when we send a message, the server will respond with a copy of the created message, and that'll be very convenient for us. Then what I want to do is I want to go ahead and put together two new API calls. I want to do a public static class mark message as read request, which will have a public int message ID, and I'll go ahead and generate him a constructor. And then we'll have a public static class mark message as read response, which will inherit from service response, and I don't really care if he has any parameters in him. So that should be pretty straightforward. The client sends that whenever a message is read on the phone. Next up, what I want to do is a public static class get message details request, and he's going to take a public int ID, and I'm going to generate him a constructor, and then I'm going to create a public static class get message details response with a public message. So this should be another fairly obvious API call. Given a message ID, we can return data about it. Let's go ahead and make sure that line is terminated there. But anyway, so pretty straightforward. We send in an ID, server sends back a message object that has the full details. Now, before we go and we implement all of these three new API endpoints, I do want to make one more change up here on my account. And that is, I want to come up here to my login with username response. Where are you? Login with username response. And instead of having this inherit from user response, I want to have it inherit from service response. And the reason for that is it turned out to be more convenient when putting together the live API that the server doesn't return with a full user object when we invoke this particular endpoint. Anyway, so that's about it. Really now all we have to do is jump into our in-memory implementations and add our implementations for these different events. So the first thing we're going to definitely need to do is address the errors that we might be getting right now from those modifications. In particular, our contact request no longer having an ID. So let's jump into into our in-memory contact service. And notice right when we jump into it, the whole file gets squigglified, and that's just because of this one line of code right up here. So let's just remove that one line of code, that one I, passing in the I as a parameter here, so we're no longer passing in an ID. Now let's jump into our in-memory account service, and just eyeballing the file, it seems we do have an error here, and that's here. It's because we invoked login user with this response, this account.login with username response, but he no longer inherits from the user response. So basically all I got to do here is I'm just going to say new account.user response instead of passing in the response itself. So that fixes that bug there, or that error. So now let's go ahead and implement the GCM thing. So the GCM thing is pretty straightforward. It's going to be a new service call, and it'll be what was the exact verbiage that I used in that? I used update GCM registration. So I'll say update GCM registration, and he's going to take in an account.update GCM registration request, and I'm simply going to post delayed a new instantiation of account.update GCM registration response. So not going to do anything with it. There's nothing really to do in the case of the in-memory service layer. So now that we've done that, we can jump over into our in-memory messages service and implement those two new API calls, our mark as read and our get details. So I'm going to say subscribe public void mark message as read messages dot mark messages as read request, and this will simply post delayed new messages mark messages as read response. And then I'll do another subscribe down here for my get message details messages.get message details request. And for this, I don't really care really. I guess I can go ahead and just do messages.get message response equals new details response, and then I can do response.message equals new instantiation of a message, and then we'll pass in an ID of 1, a calendar of Gregorian calendar dot. I always forget the Java calendar API for some reason. So let's go ahead and just see what exactly calendar get instance. How did I not remember that? Short message, long message, image URL, don't care. In fact, I'll set this as null. And the reason I'll do that is I'll write some additional code in the show messages activity once we implement it that will just not grab a message if it's null. For the other user, we'll just do new user details, passing in 1, true, display name, username. Yeah, don't really care a whole lot about these parameters. Is from us will set to false, is read will set to false. Okay, then the last thing we want to do here is we want to post delayed response so that whoever called it gets his awesome message object. All right, so that is basically the last couple service calls that we needed to write. So now what I want to do is I want to move on into my service response class. So let's go ahead and open up our infrastructure package and open up our service response. What I want to do here is I want to make our property errors case insensitive. So basically, we have this hash map right here, and it gets set to our property errors, and at the moment it's case sensitive, and I want it to be case insensitive. If you're familiar with Java, you might be saying, well, you know, why don't you use like a tree map or use a different compare or something like that. The problem is our property errors field is going to be instantiated directly from our JSON parser, and we don't really have as much control over that as we would like. So what I'm going to do is kind of something a little hacky. I'm going to let the property errors be a normal case-sensitive hash map as instantiated by the JSON parser, and then I'm going to have a secondary tree map that's going to be case insensitive, which will be populated on the first time somebody asks for a particular property error. So it's a little hacky, but it should work just fine. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to create another field, and this is going to be our case insensitive one. So it's going to be a tree map of string and string, and I'm going to call this property errors case insensitive. And for our property errors case insensitive, I'm not going to instantiate it in the constructor. Instead, what I'm going to do is I'm going to scroll down here to our get property error, which is right here, our get property error method. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to say if property errors case insensitive equals null, or property errors case insensitive dot size does not equal property errors dot size. So if the property errors were modified, or this is the first time you try to get a property error, then what I want to do is I want to instantiate our property errors case insensitive by instantiating it as a tree map. But for the constructor, I'm going to pass in a comparator, which is going to be string.case insensitive order. And then I'm going to go ahead and say property errors case insensitive dot put all, and I'm going to pass in property errors. So we're copying the case sensitive property errors into the case insensitive property errors. And then I want to go ahead and instead of getting it from the case sensitive property errors field, we'll get it from our case insensitive property errors field. All right. So the next thing I want to do is I want to go ahead and add a new method here, and I want to basically for our is critical, I want to add a convenience method for setting whether or not we have a critical error. So immediately under set is critical, I want to say public void set critical error, string critical error. And what this is simply going to do is it's going to say is critical is true, and then it's going to say operation error equals critical error. And again, the whole concept I have of the critical errors is something like you can't connect to the servers, or there was a 500, an ISE 500 on the server, which would indicate that there's a bug somewhere. Whereas a typical non-critical error would typically be something you would see in user validation logic. Anyway, with that out of the way, I want to go ahead and make a couple modifications or improvements, I think, to the send message and new message activities. So I'm going to start off with the send message activity. What I want to have happen here is now that we have the message object being passed back to us by the API, I want to have the application open that message that was just sent. So you send an image, and then when you hit send and it's been accepted, it'll open back up that thing that you just sent. And to do that, we need to start kind of threading data around our application a little bit. Now, first of all, in our send message activity, I now need to be able to return my messages, or the message that was created. So what I'm going to do here is all the way here at the top of the file next to our other constants, I'm going to create a public static final string, and this is going to be a result underscore message. And it'll be simply the string result underscore message. Then what I want to do is all the way down at the bottom, on our on messages sent, now down here, instead of just saying set result okay, I also want to fill an intent with return data. So I'm going to say intent data equals new intent. Then I'm going to say data put extra result message. And then for the actual value that we're putting in here, it's simply going to be response.message, that new field that we created. And then after I do that, the last thing I want to do here is set result to result okay, comma, data. So we're passing in that intent in addition to our result okay status. All right, so finally, since we're in our send message activity, I do want to actually address a bug real quickly. We don't currently load in the image correctly inside of our on URL create. So you'll notice that when I say up here, if image URL does not equal null, then I load in, I get the image, I find it by ID, and then I load it in with Picasso. But there is there are a couple problems with this. First of all, Picasso likes to cache things. That's kind of what it's good at. It'll cache things both in memory and on disk. And the issue is that we send in the same path every time we create a new message. We always use test-image. And that'll cause an issue with the going back and sending out a new message. It won't be reloaded because Picasso will say, oh, it's the same image URI, therefore I could just load that image from cache. And that'll be problematic. So what I want to do here is I really want to quickly say Picasso with, and I could go ahead and do Picasso equals Picasso with this, and then use this Picasso for both. So I'll say Picasso.invalidate file, and the file that I'm wanting to invalidate is image URI. So just invalidate image URI, and then immediately after we do a load. And I'm doing a Picasso with and aliasing that into local variable because I don't want to do it Picasso.with twice. Then the next problem is going to be we don't actually set the path to the image in our request, and that's fixed simply by doing request.setImagePath to image URI. Now, all of these issues would have been probably detected had there been unit testing earlier on in the application, or I added more error handling to my service requests. But in the interest of time, obviously we didn't do that. However, I want to point out that this architecture lends itself to be tested like that very easily, and we wouldn't have found, or would have already caught these bugs early on if we had done that. Anyway, so now what I want to do is I want to jump into my new message activity. And in here, really all I'm going to worry about up here is I want to jump all the way down to my onActivity result. And up here, we can set our result to okay and we can finish ourselves. But then what I'm going to do is I'm going to say message equals data.getParcelableExtra, and we'll pass in send message activity dot result message. So we're extracting that message object out that was returned by the server. Then what I want to do is say intent equals new intent this, and I want to launch the message activity. So I'll do message activity.class, and then I'll simply do intent.putExtra message activity extra message and message, and then start activity intent. So we do finish ourselves right here, and so that means that when you hit back, you will be from the message activity. When you hit back, you'll be where you started before you launched the new message activity. So if you're in a contact, for example, and you hit the reply button and you send your message, you'll get to see your message after it's sent, but then when you hit back, you'll be right at your back at your contact. And I think that's a pretty straightforward way of handling this thing. All right, the last thing I want to do in this video is I want to clean up some potential issues with our two views. Our resource layout, our list item message, and our list item contact request. Now, they have a potential issue with how their backgrounds are going to work and how we can handle click events to them and how the nice little ripple effect can be applied. So what I want to do here is I want to change it up a little bit to where the object that's going to be clicked on is going to be this relative layout and not the card view. And then on the contact request, I want to simply change his background a little bit. So again, I'm doing this to make these list views work a little bit better with the recycler view that we're going to be putting together in the next video. So for the list item message, like I said, I just want to make it so that when we click on it, we're clicking on this relative layout, so that the relative layout can have the opportunity to show the nice little ripple effect. So what I'm going to do is the first thing I'm going to do is give them a background. And the background is going to be $Android selectable item background, which is a pretty common thing to select. We do have to set clickable to true, otherwise he won't receive the click events. And then I'm going to give him an ID of list item message background, so that we know, so we can add an on-click listener for him. Then, before we jump into the adapters, I'm going to jump into the list item contact request. And for this guy, all I'm going to do is jump up here to his relative layout, and I'm doing this so he works better with card views. See, right now it'll work just fine in the list views, but he'll look kind of gross in a card view, as in when you click on him, you won't see the ripple effect. So to do that, we simply set the background to Android selectable item background, and we're set clickable to true. Now all that's left to do is to fix our list item message, because now we just made it so you can't click on these when they're in a list view or recycler view anymore, because the click events are being intercepted by this relative layout and aren't being sent back up the chain. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to change the code so that our on-click listener event handler is attached to this relative layout instead. So I'm going to jump into my views package, and I'm going to start off in the messages view holder, the message view holder. And up here at the top, I'm going to create a private view background view. Then for in his constructor, I'm going to say background view equals view find view by ID r.id item message background. And I will go ahead and give him a getter. So I'll give him a getter for the background view for that. So we'll make a method called get background view. And that'll be that. All that we need to do for the view holder. So now let's go ahead and update his adapter. And remember, the adapter is what's responsible for handling or for delegating the on message clicked events. So the adapter will obviously need to be modified to support having the click event on the different control. So what we're going to do here is right here on my on create view holder, instead of just straight up returning a new instantiation of message view holder, I'm going to instantiate or alias this out into a local variable. So I'm going to say message view holder. I'll just call this view holder, I guess would be fine. And then I'm going to say view holder.get background view .set on click listener to equal this. And then I'm going to say return view holder. Oh, come on. Now, the next thing I need to do is I need to make sure that I set the tag of the background view to the current message that it's looking at. So what I'm going to do here is first of all, I'm going to say message equals messages get position. Then I'm going to say holder.getBackgroundView.setTag, and I'm going to set it to that to message. And then instead of passing in messages.getAtPosition, I'm just going to pass in a reference to my local variable. So this way we're setting the tag on the actual background view itself and not the parent view, which is what the populate method did in the past. And that should be it. Our onClick handler is going to work just as it did before, because our view that's passed into the onClick handler is going to be the background view, and the background view has its tag set to the currently shown message, which means this code is going to execute properly, which will delegate it back into the onMessage click listener. And that's it. That's pretty much all the little things I wanted to address before moving on to our main activity, which will be fun because we can look at a little bit of a non-trivial recycler view. But yeah, I guess we'll see you guys in the next video.